Last week, the first and only season of the 1974 Planet of the Apes television series celebrated its 50-year anniversary from when the show first aired. I have now given my review of the entire series, as well as individual reviews for every single episode, all of which you can find right here on the Ape Nation channel. And now, after months of watching and discussing the show week by week, all the way to its end, the time has finally come for me to rank all 14 episodes of the show. If you like what I do here and want to show your support, be sure to hit the like button on this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so that you can stay up to date on all things apes. Enjoy the video. And welcome back to Ape Nation, your number one source for all things Planet of the Apes on YouTube. My name is Josh, and today I am going to be giving you my ranking of all 14 episodes of the short-lived Planet of the Apes TV series from 1974. Like I said up top, my full review of the series can be found right here on the channel, but for those who haven't checked it out and want to know how I feel about the show overall, in general, I think the show is really enjoyable. It's got some issues with an over-reliance on formula. I think there's too many plot conveniences, too much wasted potential especially, and a lot of it has a lower production value than most of the original movies. That said, I love the characters of Galen and Burke, as well as a handful of other characters who appear throughout the series. There's a lot of fun adventure to be had, some really good humor, tense action sequences, some really great world building, and honestly, just as a fan of the Planet of the Apes universe as a whole, it's just good to have something solid from the franchise to watch outside of the movies. So with that out of the way, let's get into my ranking of every single episode of the show, kicking things off with number 14, and that would be episode 13, The Liberators. I think this is hands down the worst episode of the entire series. It makes sense to me why this was never aired in favor of Up Above the World So High. For those who don't know, only 13 episodes of the show were aired before it was canceled, when there was another episode that was never aired, and that was this one. I don't actually know the reason why, but I'm choosing to believe that it's because they knew this was not a good one, and they knew Up Above the World So High was much better, so they opted to go with that one. I don't know if that's actually what happened, but I'm choosing to believe so because it just makes sense to me because this episode is not good. I think the human characters are boring and the story spends way too much time on them and not on our main trio of Galen, Verdon, and Burke. And also the acting from the two main human characters in this story of this episode is really bad, like noticeably bad. And I'm usually pretty lenient on acting, even if it's just mediocre, but it's bad. The storytelling here is also really dull throughout the entire thing. The humans capturing slaves for apes is an interesting concept, but it's never used in a way that matters, and it wastes potential to do some really interesting political commentary. Galen is the one bright spot of the episode, since Verdon and Burke are in prison for most of the time, but other than that, it's a waste of time, and it's not an episode that I can see myself ever rewatching. Moving on to number 13, episode 2, The Gladiators. I think this episode isn't terrible. It's not one that I will ever watch again, but I think it's better than number 14, obviously. I think there's just too much focus on the new human characters, just like with The Liberators. I think that's a common criticism of a lot of the episodes that I don't like as much, is just there's new human characters that are introduced that I don't care about, and it's just time being taken away from either the apes or our main characters. I think the story conceptually is really cool with the fights and the gladiator match going on, but the execution is just really lackluster. But I will say that I think the world building here, and just in terms of introducing more aspects of the Planet of the Apes universe at this point in time, is really cool to see, and it does introduce the character of Prefect Barlow, who I did go on to like a lot more following this episode. But overall, it's not a great episode. It's not very memorable. It has some stuff that weighs it down, but it does have some stuff to enjoy, so that is why it is at number 13. Coming in at number 12 on my ranking is going to be episode 5, The Legacy. I think the story here had potential to be emotionally moving with Verdon and these two other human characters, but it falls really flat. Those two human characters, the young boy and the woman who is kind of a love interest for Verdon, they're just very bland. I liked what they were trying to do, especially for Verdon's character development, and in that regard it does succeed to a degree, but I just found those two characters to be really boring. And also this introduces some concepts that never get really revisited at all, i.e. something like the disc and the hologram stuff, and it's just an episode that has some cool ideas but doesn't really do a lot with them. The thing that I took away again the most is just what it does for Alfred Verdon as a character because he doesn't get a whole lot of development in a lot of other episodes, if not most episodes of the show. So at the very least, the episode gives you something for that character to chew on, so that is why it comes in at number 12. Coming in at number 11 is episode 6 of the show, Tomorrow's Tide. I think this episode for me mostly stands out just due to the action scenes and how effective the tension was during those, specifically the underwater scenes. I think it's really well directed, and I think it also has some of the best and funniest Galen moments in the entire show. And speaking of the underwater stuff, I think also just the beach setting as a whole, it's really refreshing for the show, and it's really cool to see there, and it works with the story. I do think that the gods/shark thing that's going on with the humans, it's silly, but it works well enough for the story being told here. And also I think that this episode has some of the funnier and overall best Galen moments in the entire show. This is one of those episodes that Galen really stands out. So that to me is why it's going to come in at number 11. Coming in at number 10 is episode 12, The Cure. The premise in this episode overall with the plague that is going around the town is solid. It's a little simple, but it's well executed. It has a kind of race against time aspect to it that's fun and adds a lot of tension. And there's political commentary about anti-science beliefs and its role in government. It's pretty surface level, but I still appreciate that it's there. And there's a character named Zoran who at the beginning of the episode I wasn't really sure about. I didn't really like him and I found him to be kind of stubborn, but he wins you over in the end, even though he's still not exactly a great person. You get to know him and you get to appreciate and enjoy him a little bit more by the end. And so overall, it's a really solid episode. I enjoy it quite a bit, and that's why it's coming in at number 10. Coming in at number 9 on my ranking is going to be episode 9, and that would be the horse race. And that specific horse race in question is the main reason why. I think the racing scene towards the end of the episode is really fun and it's really tense. The action is really well done. I think the directing there was some of the best in the entire show, at least in terms of action sequences go. I mentioned Prefect Barlow earlier. This is the episode that made him one of my favorite characters in the show. I love that you get to spend more time with him. I love that they brought him back, and I think that the actor did a really great job in the role. I also think the story being told here, it's one of those that is again very simple, but it's fun and it offers some good character moments, especially for Galen and Burke. I also think the episode presents an opportunity for Urko to have a more of a villainous presence than he does throughout most of the rest of the show, so I really appreciate that about it as well. It's not one of my top 5 favorites, but overall it is one of the better episodes of the series, and that is why it comes in at number 9. Coming in at number 8 on my ranking is going to be episode 4 of the show, The Good Seeds. This is an episode that when it first started, I had a feeling was going to end up in my bottom 5, but it ended up being a bit higher, and it won me over after being a bit iffy on it at first when I was watching it. I will say the episode would be even higher if not for the character of Anto, who I did not like throughout the entire episode, but aside from him, I think the episode has some really great character development for the 3 heroes and their relationship with one another. I also really liked the rest of Anto's family. I think all of them are really enjoyable, really likable, and it tells a pretty basic but fun story that's easily enjoyable about people putting aside their differences, and it's also the first episode to explore different ape tribes and different viewpoints, and so for that it comes in at number 8. Coming in at number 7 on my ranking is going to be episode 14, the final episode of the show, Up Above the World So High. This episode stands out to me in particular because of the flying scenes that I mentioned in my review. I think both of them are really great, really well done. One of them is a lot more fun and uplifting, whereas the other one's a lot more attention filled, but I think both of them are really enjoyable, very memorable. It also serves well as a final episode and as a positive note for the show to go out on as a whole, with some of Roddy McDowall's best acting in the entire series. I think the relationship between Roddy McDowall's Galen and the character of Carcia is also something that's really fascinating to watch. That's one of my favorite dynamics that we got out of the entire series, and overall it's a really well directed, really well put together episode, and that is why it comes in at number 7. At number 6 we have episode 1, the pilot episode, Escape from Tomorrow. I think this episode is one that stuck with me a lot throughout the entire show, as one that I overall really enjoyed a lot more than I expected to, especially for a pilot episode. This does a really great job at introducing you to the characters of Verdon, Burke, and Galen, as well as Urko and Zeus, despite the fact that those two characters don't really get a whole lot to do more and more as the show goes on, but it gets you to care about the heroes and it sets up each of the character dynamics really well in just one episode. I think it does that excellent. It also does a really great job at establishing and explaining how the world works at this point in the timeline. Whether it is or isn't in the same universe as the movies, it still does a great great job at explaining where we are, what's going on, and how things work. And to get you excited by the end to see where the rest of the story is going to go, to see where Galen and Verdon and Burke's journey is going to go. And that is why, for me, this comes in at number 6. Coming up next at number 5 on my ranking is going to be episode 11, The Tyrant. This is an episode that I'd heard some really good things about it going into it, and I was not disappointed. I think the story is a lot of fun, specifically for being able to get the trio to work together, hatching out a plan to take down Aboro. And speaking of Aboro, this is a character who's introduced in this episode and is a fantastic one-off villain, played really, really well by Percy Rodriguez, who I think gives one of the best performances in the entire show, one of the most memorable and most fun performances in the entire show. And it's just a classic corruption story that's really well directed. There's also a fun dynamic to watch between Aboro and Urko, which is a relationship that I never expected to see, a villain kind of thing where one goes against the other, but I really enjoyed what they were doing there. And also it's just one of both Galen and Roddy McDowall's most entertaining and fun and memorable episodes of the entire series. I think the character of Galen gets a lot of fun stuff to do, and Roddy McDowall does a great job at pulling it off and bringing it to life. And so that is why The Tyrant comes in at number 5. Coming in at number 4 on my list is going to be episode 8, The Deception. This is an episode that is a fan favorite as far as I know, and I can understand why, because I think it is great. I think the Burke and Fauna relationship is really sweet. It's really compelling. The message about prejudice as surface level in a way as it kind of is, it's pretty well done, at least as far as the show standards go. And the KKK parallel usage is pretty shocking to a degree, and I really appreciated that. The story also felt a lot bigger than a TV show, more so than I think any of the other episodes. And I said this in my review, but it felt like it could have been a Planet of the Apes movie in and of itself, maybe a more intimate, smaller scale one. But I think it could have served as a story for an entire Planet of the Apes movie, with Fauna falling for Burke, not knowing that he's really a human. I think that's a story that could have been expanded. It's also just another episode that takes a common trope and a common formula and does something fresh with it. And it's one of the most well-directed episodes in terms of pace and just engaging the audience. And so I think it's a great one. It's one of my favorites, and that is why it comes in at number 4. Finally, getting into the top 3 here, and coming in at number 3 is going to be episode 10, The Interrogation. This is an episode that I was so blown away by when I saw it. I think Wanda is the best villain of the show by far. She is so menacing, so fascinating to watch, and the direction and tone of this episode is so effectively eerie and intense, and it taps into this horror/thriller genre a little bit, even specifically the interrogation scenes. And those interrogation scenes are some of the show's most well-directed and memorable moments overall. The story just keeps you gripped from beginning to end. The episode also introduces Galen's parents, who I really liked, and it tackles relatable themes about generational moral divides between parents and kids. That's something that I don't think has ever been touched on in Planet of the Apes before or after this, and I think that's something that's very, very relatable, especially in modern times. And so I thought that was really fascinating to see play out in the show. And it also just has some of the best acting, if not the best acting, in the entire series, from Beverly Garland, Mark Leonard as Urko, and especially James Naughton, who I think gives his best performance of the show in this episode. I think he's fantastic. For all those reasons and more, that is why The Interrogation comes in at number 3. Coming up next at number 2, and this is the episode that had the most hype for it going in, I heard the most buzz about for watching, and that would be episode 3 of the show, The Trap. The character development for both the characters of Burke and Urko is fantastic. I think both these characters get a lot of time to shine here. It's some really well done, really well utilized tension throughout the entire episode, and it's again an episode that takes this formula, taking two characters, a hero and a villain, sticking them together and making them work together to get their way out of a situation, but doing it in a way that feels fresh, adding things into it that makes it feel different, adding all the stuff with Urko learning about humans and then maybe discarding that. It adds to that tension, it adds to that drama, it adds to that character development between the two characters, and the episode as a whole just also has some of the highest quality filmmaking, I think, in the entire show, just in terms of directing. And by far, I think this is Urko's best episode as a villain and as a character in general. I think he is at his best in this entire episode. I don't love the character as a whole, unfortunately, but I do love him in this episode, and that is why it is coming in at number 2 on my list. And finally, getting to number 1 on the list, my favorite episode of the Planet of the Apes TV show, and that would be episode 7, The Surgeon. Like I said, this is my favorite episode of the entire show. I was pretty caught between this and The Trap, but the more I thought about it, the more I kept thinking about this, and I actually went back and rewatched the episode again to make a decision, and this is by far my favorite episode. I think the Kyra and Galen relationship is so endearing, and it just made me you want to see those characters even more. And the character of Kyra herself is by far my favorite one-off character in the entire show. I think she is sweet. I think she is intelligent. I think she is very, very charismatic, but she's also tough and she can also be cold. And I think there's a lot of layers to her that we don't even get to see explored in this episode that are just presented on the surface. I think it's also a very Galen heavy episode of the show, if not the most Galen heavy episode of the show. And I think it uses the character of Galen better than any other episode does. I also think this episode is handling its social commentary better than anything else in the show when it's diving into the subject of science versus religion and tradition, whether it be governments or doctors. And the story is tension driven more and more as it goes, especially as it gets into that last 10 or so minutes. The ending is great. It's also just a great episode for all of the characters, whether it be Burke, whether it be Galen, whether it be Kira, whether it be the main doctor of Kira, whether it be Verdon. I think everyone shines in this episode. It's so well rounded. It's so full of tension. The new characters are great. The relationships are really well handled. And that is why it is my favorite episode of the show. And it is at number 1 on my list. But I want to know what you guys have to say about my list. And I want to know how you guys rank all of these episodes. Let me know your ranking of all the episodes down in the comments below, or even just let me know your top 5, top 10. I want to know what your favorites, what your least favorites are, and I want to know why. Thank you so much for checking out today's video here on Ape Nation. If you liked this video, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so that you can stay up to date on all things apes. I'll catch you in the next one, so until then, goodbye.